Welcome everyone to a KTXS special. I'm Will Jensen here at the Recital Hall on the Abilene Christian University campus. We want to thank ACU for its partnership with this important moment as we discuss some of the issues facing the African American community here in our area. In just a few minutes, we're going to introduce you to our distinguished panel who will help us talk about some of these important issues during this event and beyond. What's happening now for the African American community? We want to talk about the path forward and what needs to change and how we can go about doing this together. And so now it is time to introduce you to our panel. And we want to begin with Police Chief Marcus Dudley. And Ms. Chief Dudley has more than 23 years of experience in the police force, and he became Abilene's police chief in 2020. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. And next we have Dr. Nita Burton. Dr. Burton is a professor of management science and information systems here at ACU. She has conducted research in studying how people interact with technology and change and create socio-technical environments. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And next on our panel is Dr. Jerry Taylor. Dr. Taylor is an associate professor of Bible, missions, and ministry at ACU. Dr. Taylor works extensively outside the classroom as well, speaking in conferences, organizing leadership summits, and is author of the book Courageous Compassion. Thank you for being here, Dr. Taylor.
My pleasure.
And next is Alicia Taylor, an ACU alum. She's a producer, actress, and a director. Currently, she's working as an archival producer for the documentary I've Been Waiting, which is set to be released this summer. Thank you for being here, Alicia.
Thank you.
And now to Mayor Anthony Williams. He was elected in June of 2017 after serving 16 years as a city councilman. In his professional career, Mayor Williams is the Advancement and Executive Community Relations Officer here at ACU. Mayor Williams, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, and we want to begin now with our panel. We're going to talk about the path forward with this. It's 2022. What is the state of black people in Abilene today? And Dr. Taylor, we wanted to start with you. And after you're finished, we encourage everyone to join in this discussion.
I think the state of black people in Abilene is the same as the state of black people in America in general. There is still the push and the pull of the residual of slavery. And I don't think that our country has really accepted the fact that you can reduce a human being to such a level, even to that of being a workhorse, and to keep that people in that condition for several hundred years, and then suddenly release them with having no preparation of how to provide for themselves independently. And then for those same people, years later, to be looked upon as being derelict, lazy, ignorant, as if it was their own fault, and not remembering that the people are experiencing what they're experiencing today as a result of being the legacy of a people that were stolen, of a people that were stripped, of a people that were knocked unconscious. And so now they're having to learn how to survive and to think and to get as much education as possible. And so that is the state of black people in America in general. And I would say that that would apply to black people in Abilene as well. Not everybody, but I think as a people, that historical legacy is there, and we have to continue to admit that and to continue to address it.
Dr. Burton, I see you nodding there. What are your thoughts on this issue?
I would agree with Dr. Taylor, mainly because it is as though we are people who are not people. You know, I'm trying to think about that sense of where it's difficult to express, but then it's not. It's almost as though you're living as an object of a society that's not your own. And so there isn't a way necessarily to break out of that, because that system is perpetuated over time. And so it is very much the picture that we created this environment because of who we are, when it's more so that sense of where we are objects of an oppressive society, and one where basically is that we are given what we're supposed to have. And so the opportunity to be able to make an intentional difference, I guess. And again, as I'm thinking through, because I didn't expect this question, I really didn't. But that sense of where I live that, it's a good question, because if you have lived that, you can speak to that. And to be under the named identity of another race, another society, is a daily challenge.
You know, Alicia, with the younger perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
I think for my generation, we are really trying to define what resistance looks like for us. You know, through the civil rights movement, resistance looked a certain way, or throughout history, resistance kind of has a certain picture with it. And I think for my generation and myself as well, just defining that within my own Black body as a Black woman as well. So something as simple as taking a nap for me is resistance, because my ancestors were not allowed that space. They weren't given that time. So for my generation, I feel like we are looking at things in a way of, in everyday life, where are these moments where I can reclaim my time, my peace, my sanity, not only for myself, but the generations before, as they are resting, and the generations that are to come that can look at me and see how I move and how I operate within, you know, these systems and these structures. I think that would be my response for my generation, and not to speak for all of us, because we are a very diverse group of young Black people, and it's so interesting to be in conversation with each other and with different platforms like TikTok and things like that, to really connect with Black people from different areas, different backgrounds, and to really form that sense of unity that may not look like unity looked in the past. So,
as we prepare for the midterm elections, what are some ways to get more Black people to the polls, and what are some of the hurdles when it comes to getting more African Americans to vote? Mayor Williams, your thoughts?
You know, and to your previous question, the very things that exist elsewhere in regards to the African American community exist in Abilene, Texas. I'm a native Abilenian, and when I think about those who participate at the polls, and over the years, I've been elected official for 20 years, it is discouraging, because those who we are elect set policies that affect the way that we live. And it is important, you know, the whole theme, a path forward, an opportunity to be better. I would encourage the African American community to go vote, to be candidates, to be at the table, to have an opportunity that will create more balance and structure in government at all levels. 2 weeks from yesterday, or the 14th of February, is early voting, and the primary season begins. 2 months after that, we have local races, both at the school board as well as the city council, followed by November elections that will determine who will represent us in Austin and DC. And it is important that we participate in that process.
I'll open this up to anyone else who would like to speak on this. Why is it difficult, and what are some ways that we could get more African Americans to participate in the voting process? And why do you think in some cases they don't feel like it's something that they're willing to do?
I can speak to that.
Yes.
The representation. I think it's a challenge to know who to vote for and to have a sense of where it matters. It may not matter to many people, especially if you don't feel that there is someone that's going to represent the values, the interests of the Black community. And so that sense of really considering who is on the ballot, who do you really vote for if you're an African American?
Anyone else?
I think we have to begin to come to grips with the fact that a large segment of our country no longer believes in democracy. And in fact, they have decided to do everything in their power to dismantle it. And some of the literature that I've read, there are those who endorse the spirit of white supremacy, and they have been writing to their constituency, telling them that democracy no longer works for white people. Because in a democracy, the majority rules. And so with the demographic shift that has taken place in this country, it has struck the nerve of fear in the hearts of a large segment of Americans who once celebrated democracy, but behind closed doors and in secret places, the conversations are going on about how democracy needs to be replaced by a system of government and control that can be in the hands of a small minority like apartheid South Africa. And so I think we as American people, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and otherwise, we're going to have an honest conversation out in the public as we're having now and ask ourselves the question, do we really, really believe in democracy? And if we say yes, then we must challenge those whom we know right now are working in this state and across this country to disenfranchise Black voters. And if we cannot speak to that with conviction and with collectivity, then democracy is something that we only give lip service to.
It's a very, very big point. How do we go about that, ensuring that democracy will still exist in this country?
I think we have to be able to look down the road, not very far, maybe 2 years, and begin to see what it would look like if a democracy falls apart. Now, we think the United States is totally different from any other democracy that has ever existed, but there are people warning us that democracies can go out of existence overnight. And so if that is the case, everybody on the ship of democracy got to be filled with the spirit of urgency and not take it for granted that every citizen in this country believes in democracy. And so what do we do about that? When we see democracy being assaulted, raped, abused, we really need to stand up and hold our officials accountable, regardless of which party they are of. And if they are making laws and policies to disenfranchise somebody because they are a Republican or because they are a Democrat, the whole collective needs to stand up and call that out.
All right. George Floyd. I think you know where we're going to be going with this, Chief Dudley. Daunte Wright, Breonna Taylor. These are names that have been in the media a lot lately. And Chief Dudley, we wanted to hear from you about why do you feel some African Americans have different experiences when dealing with police compared to other demographics?
Well, I think that, chiefs all across the country have identified that there are issues within their respective departments. And they are doing what they can to begin to hold folks accountable. I think the judicial system has recognized that there has been some bias in areas of policing and is re-examining itself. And so I think that when you feel that the heaviest presence of police are within your neighborhood, and it is a mostly person of color neighborhood, that can feel as though you're being picked on. If you feel that you didn't violate the law and yet you get pulled over for a traffic stop, you're going to feel like there might have been some racial influence behind the reason why you're stopped. And when those kinds of incidents continue to happen and happen repeatedly, it's something that will permeate throughout our African American communities as we're under attack. And so I think we're going to have to continue in law enforcement to keep working with the community and not against them. And I think that it's important for us to engage our communities in a way that allows for folks to feel a part of the process. And I think over time that there is an opportunity for us to make some change. I listened to both doctors talk about the state of African Americans today, and I heard a lot of from them of what I heard growing up, and I could definitely relate to this feeling like you are somehow being oppressed and suppressed in many ways in terms of your economic opportunities and your opportunities for education, and that stems back from slavery. And as I listened to them, I also found myself still feeling a great sense of hope for not only where we are today, especially here in Abilene, Texas, but also for our country, that we can heal and move past this, and that we can continue to value people with differing opinions, different thoughts, inviting them to the table, to be inclusive of them in the process of how we police, how we develop policies. I think that it's all possible. So I still have hope.
Will, when I, as African American man, as a human being, watching a life leave before us with a man kneeling on a man's neck, one of the most traumatic things I have ever seen, and I think for many, with no respect to gender, race, or culture, most folk knew what that was. That was a modern day lynching. And so, like you and like all of us, when I think about other situations across this country and I see how we are so divided, it's very, very disappointing. The conversation today is about Abilene, and I want to just say some things, if I could.
Absolutely.
About Abilene. One thing that we have chosen to do is, and not many cities still do this, but we have maintained our own police training academy, where it's cheaper to allow someone to graduate from a school elsewhere and bring them in, What we decided to do in this community is to keep that in-house. We've done that for a half a decade because we wanted to be sure that the culture of those men and women who don the blue represent us. Does not mean that Abilene is perfect. I don't know if any industry is perfect, but I'll put our performance in that regard against any other mid-sized city in the state because I watch those numbers. And while we're going there, I just want you to think about this in regards to leadership. There is not another mid-sized city, and let's define that, a city of 50,000 to 250,000 that has an African-American police chief, that has an Hispanic fire chief, an African-American mayor. And I think one thing that we've done in this community, we want to walk the walk. And so I think we want to be cognizant of what's going on around us, but also I want to look at how's Abilene responding, how we're responding. And again, not perfect, but I feel good about the way that we handle things. We have issues that come up. We do. But I think in my 20 years of service in this community, formerly on the council, I've seen Abilene respond better than most.
And what are some of those issues that you say that are there? And with the question being, do we feel like African Americans in Abilene are treated fairly by police? What are some ways that we can work toward making sure that happens? And you brought up some issues that we have specifically. What are some of those?
Well, I remember this, and I know it was a group of local pastors, and this was years ago, who lived in a section of our city that really wanted help from law enforcement to help clean up that neighborhood. In fact, we had a community meeting, and these pastors invited their parishioners as well as neighbors in that neighborhood and talked about what are some things we can do. And they asked for increased patrol of that area. Then Chief Stanridge abided by that, but that means certain things. And so disproportionately, those in a neighborhood, you have some who are getting stopped that would argue maybe shouldn't get stopped, but it's responding to that. And so what we try to do, let's rethink that a little bit. What are some other creative ways that we can respond to a request, to a neighborhood, but not create a policy that does the opposite of what is intended? And so those are some things that we've experienced, I've witnessed firsthand that we have done, and trying to be responsive, but also not provide affirmation to a stereotype that may exist in this community and elsewhere.
And Chief Dudley, as the chief of our police department, are there in fact ways that y'all go about doing things to ensure that African Americans are treated fairly on stops here in Abilene, and we don't see one of these tragedies with the names that I read at the beginning of this topic?
Well, all of our officers go through training on how to conduct a safe and respectful traffic stop. But, you know, I guess to get to the heart of what you're asking, which is, are there times when there are challenges? Absolutely. And oftentimes what I find is a complainant about a traffic stop or the handling of a situation that merits us looking into it. And we come out on the other side because of things like our body-worn cameras or our in-dash dash cameras, and my willingness to bring those folks into my office and sit down and go through the incident that they're complaining about. We found that the officer was respectful, professional, and handled the situation appropriately, even when they had to make the arrest. I can't guarantee you that that has happened throughout the history of a police department that's been in existence for over 138 years. But I can tell you in the past year that I've been here, any of the complaints that I've received and we've dealt with firsthand, interacting directly with our citizens, we've found that the officers behaved appropriately, and that in most cases the violations did occur as were indicated. We didn't stop there. We continue to have discussions with folks that have had those kinds of challenges to make sure they understood how the court process would work and what some options might be for them throughout that process, because we realized they still experienced something that they felt was traumatic, and I didn't want that to be the lasting impression. So it's about us becoming more aware and tuned and not being afraid to help people walk through the process of how to file a complaint and how to address the complaint after it's been resolved.
Any other thoughts on that issue?
Oh, I was just going to say, excuse me, this may be a little of a sidestep, but just thinking about the consumption of media, especially from Hollywood and filmmakers, because I've noticed a trend in the past 10 or 15 years. A lot of movies that are critiquing police often have African American cops or Hispanic cops as the main characters, and it's really portraying that dirty cop, bad cop type image, when within the system, in my personal opinion, more white cops need to be held accountable, and that's my personal opinion. But I think it's a very interesting take that in Hollywood, a lot of these films are positioning African American cops and Hispanic cops in a very specific light. So all that to say, just be mindful of certain media that you are intaking that could cause you to see someone as an other. And the same goes with the African American community and the way that we have not been allowed to hold our own stories, to control our own stories, our own narratives. And you know, you can get on Netflix and it'll say Black Stories celebrating Black History Month, but you look at the writer, the director, the producer, and they're all white, and oftentimes white men. So is it truly a Black story? And when you have these moments of other people writing your own story that can't speak to your story culturally or from experience, they can other you. So whether it's a police officer, an African American police officer in a film that's being othered, or a young Black teen, a young Black woman that's being othered, I would just encourage everyone to be very mindful of who's writing these stories and who are they connected to, who's producing these films, and it's all connected. These aren't isolated incidents. Yeah.
And you don't have to get into specifics here, but I was just curious to wonder, have any of you on this panel ever felt like you have been targeted or treated unfairly during a traffic stop or by a police officer?
I have.
You do?
Yeah, a very scary situation. I have, family members, my brother, who has been trailed because they thought that he was someone that he wasn't. And, officers approaching our home at different hours, and just very scary moments that I think would have been handled differently if we were of a different race. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Let's move on to higher education. What are some ways to provide better access to college for African American students? Dr. Burton, do you have any thoughts on this?
If we are still addressing Abilene,
Yes.
I think that especially in today's time and really everywhere, is the cost of going to college is extremely expensive. The overall model in terms of paying for an education has changed phenomenally over the years, where at one time it was considered more of a public good, okay, where it was in the interest of the overall society to educate everyone and not have them bear the financial burden of it. And so in the last few decades, that has totally changed to the point of where becoming an education is more like buying a house, And so it is a decision, a different decision, just because it is more of an excessive burden after students actually leave the university. And so I really believe it is very much financial if we can divert funds, and I do believe we can. It's a matter of what is a priority, is that if we could go back to that model of where everyone should be educated, okay, everyone should be given the opportunity to understand what it means to be a citizen, you know, through education, and to be able to contribute to their communities because they have learned how to do so. And so again, it's that idea of removing that financial burden will make a difference.
And how do you go about doing that?
I think we can use our monies in better places, just like a household budget, right? We choose where we put our funds. And so if we make it a priority that people are worth it and that we can do it, you know, it's not like we are dealing with a limited pie. And I think we've seen that over recent years, is that we find funds for what we want to finance. And I do think that it's important to find funds in order to help students go to college without bearing a financial burden.
Are there other obstacles besides financial, do you think?
You know, it's my 25th year at Abilene Christian University, and financial obstacles for students of color, very, very significant. And there's going to be more creativity at university level and elsewhere providing those funds. But I also think it's important K through 12 in preparation. You know, this community with its school board last year had a 18-month conversation about the names on schools. Attended or listened to some of those meetings, but one thing that was lost, I didn't hear any conversations about instruction and things occurring inside those schools. We know nationwide and also in Abilene that students of color don't perform as well as the Anglo in the school system. And we know the majority of students in our school district are students of color, the highest percentile being the Hispanic community. I think there needs to be a more concentrated effort in K through 12 to be sure that we're preparing our students for success. Education is the equalizer. And I would have loved during the conversation for 18 months, there have been more of a focal point on instruction in the classroom and how we can prepare for more student success and K through 12 that will translate into increased graduates at the college level.
Alicia, what was your experience like with this?
I definitely agree. I have favorite teachers from elementary school, Taylor Elementary, Miss Sharp. My 5th grade teacher is Miss Barner, my music teacher, Miss Graham, who I still occasionally see around town, and she was the first person that encouraged me to get on stage and sing in 4th grade for a talent show. My high school theater directors, Clay Freeman, Chad Kennedy, they were huge influences on me and still connect with them all the time. And I really do think that it's important to have that connection with teachers at a very young age. But along with that, a love for knowledge and critical thinking skills. And I think that ties into talking about democracy and being able to protect it and advocate for it. I think the way that education has kind of shifted from when I was younger, I know, and I'm thankful for my parents and just teaching us critical thinking skills and how to have a thirst for knowledge and that never dry up. You know, I always say I'm a student of life and I always strive to learn. Like, there's no way for me to learn everything about one topic or one subject. And I think when it comes to higher education, sometimes the scheduling and the rigorous work, reading, and I know as a theater major it was hard. You know, you're in rehearsals for 4 hours at night and then you have like a 10-page paper that's due and you may have an 8 a.m. and it's not always set up for the student's success. But if you kind of insert that drive of wanting to know more and being able to think for yourself, and, you know, going back to film and media and being able to say, hey, this doesn't sound right, let me see who wrote this script. You can't speak to this story culturally. This kind of loses weight. It doesn't hold water with me. And that all goes back to those fundamental thinking skills that you get when you're younger. and I think that sets you up for success, and that was kind of my experience. I'm so thankful for the teachers that I did have, and like I said, I see them around town, and I'm still in communication with a lot of them, and Miss Boyd as well. She was a math teacher in high school. I don't want to leave her out either, but I had a really, really good experience with teachers, and I'm thankful for that.
You never forget the names of the great ones, do you?
No.
Dr. Taylor, what are some of the ways that we can get our youth involved, especially African American youth, more involved in our community, would you say?
I think the best way to do that is to get them involved in themselves. Going back to the topic of education. Education for a great part in this country has become big business. It has become a process of depositing information into a child instead of being education, which means to educe, bring out that which is already in. Any system of education that teaches a child more about the content on the pages of a book than it does a knowledge of self is a failed system. And so I believe that in order to get our youth involved, we have to first teach them in the cradle that there is something of the divine that exists within them, and that it is their responsibility to engage the process of self-understanding and self-knowledge. And when you gain self-understanding and self-knowledge, you then begin to access the tools of self-discipline and self-control. But if I go through an educational system never discovering that I have a mind, I will not be able to control myself or subject myself, but I will end up depending on a system to control me, to dominate me, to use force and power over me. And so I believe that we have to do a better job in teaching our children self-knowledge and a greater appreciation for silence and stillness. And if we give them those tools, they will know how to be still and to be quiet and to come into the discovery of a power that is out of this world, but will sustain them in this world in a way that they don't have to fear anybody or be intimidated by anybody. That's true education. And I think if we help our youth to get to that point, we won't have to beg them to get involved. They will want to be involved.
Are there any topics that we didn't touch on tonight that y'all feel are important or something that you would like to address?
Well, I think economics are very important. Disproportionately, African Americans have lower household incomes. That means something. I think as a community, we need to be working together and creating opportunities for everyone. I think when you provide an opportunity for a man or a woman to have an opportunity for a good paying job, that man or woman has dignity. And when they have dignity, that family unit has dignity. When families in our community have that dignity, they will engage in ways they wouldn't do so without that dignity. And we need more folk in our community to have dignity. We need more good paying jobs here that provide an opportunity for families to take care of themselves.
Anyone else?
Well, I think the mayor's being pretty modest because he's done an incredible job of assisting with getting a lot of jobs brought to the city. And I would absolutely agree that a big part of where you go for the future is dependent upon youth and their engagement. But I think the thing that I really want to bring back, and I'm bringing this up again because again I'm new to Abilene. I've been here a little over a year, and my experience has been that Abilene not only does a good job of engaging economically and providing opportunities, but it does an outstanding job of its citizens getting involved in its government. And I can tell you, being in law enforcement and the chief of an agency that has done some amazing things this past year in terms of community engagement activities. It's not lost on me that those activities didn't occur because the police department put up a sign that said, "Come join us." It was quite the opposite. It was our community, our citizens, that actually spearheaded, initiated the events, and the police department got to participate. And it is just amazing when you see around the country that that's not happening everywhere. That there is so much more strife going on. And so I don't want to minimize and say that we don't have challenges ahead of us and that we don't still face challenges today. But I just want to note, having had experience in not living here for a long period of time, just how wonderful and amazing this community is.
Well, and one thing that Dr. Taylor has done for almost 20 years is add structure to needed lives. We know that 7 out of 10 babies born to African American women are born to a single mother. That means something. It translates to outcomes in life that don't always lend themselves to success. We need to continue and have efforts in our community that recognize that and provide structure so that little boy or little girl can be called doctor one day, or whatever he or she has been purposed by the Creator. We need, when we look at an inequity or a disparity, we ought to be compelled to reach out and help that family, that young person. Each one of us, I know certainly, I know some stories on this panel. If not for someone caring about us, we won't have those opportunities. So for this community, looking for what we can do, that path, that this thematic that we're talking about, I would just encourage this community to be compassionate and to look for opportunities to help some of our neighbors who need a hand up.
All right.
I think we have to keep pushing back the fear. Mm-hmm. It is fear that causes us to see others in a different skin uniform as our competition. In the cemetery, skeletons don't argue over who's the greatest, whose skin is superior to the other skin, because there is no skin. And eventually, this stuff that we're wrapped in, the worms will have it for dinner one day. And we spend so much time focused on this that we allow fear to get inside of us, and then I feel obligated to keep you undeveloped, because if I ever allowed you to become developed and to become fully you, then you become a possible competitor. Fear causes me to see myself separate from you. Love, on the other hand, enables me to see myself as being one with you, and I would not dare do anything harmful to you, because it would be equivalent to me doing harm to myself. And only love can empower me to see myself in you and to see yourself in me. And we have to, as a community, and I think here in Abilene with the Christian colleges and the churches, what better place is there for us to exercise that with intentionality and to say that love always is more powerful than hatred, and it is more powerful than fear. And so I would say to us in Abilene, let's keep pushing fear back by embracing the internal power of God's love, because that's what God is love.
And I think that's a wonderful point to end on tonight. I guess for now, this will end our conversation. As we start off Black History Month, our hope is that everyone was able to get something out of this conversation. And we want to thank our panelists. We thank you so much for taking the time to take part in this conversation. We want to thank ACU for hosting this event tonight, and we want to thank you for watching.